the dense fog of coastal Maine, 1847, a stately Victorian structure loomed over the cliffs of Harborview, Pinewood Asylum for women. Records show that between 1847 and 1852, 73 women diagnosed with barrenness and hysteria were admitted to Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood's revolutionary fertility treatment program. The institution proudly advertised cures for the desperate childless. Of those 73 women, not a single one was ever seen in public again. For 178 years, the medical files remained sealed in the basement archives of Harborview County records. When historians finally gained access in 2023, they discovered something peculiar. Every patient file was marked treatment successful, despite no record of these women ever returning to society. No death certificates, no discharge papers, no funeral notices. They simply vanished. The most disturbing aspect wasn't what we found, says historian Eleanor Marsh, but what was deliberately removed, pages torn out, entire sections of journals missing. Someone went to extraordinary lengths to ensure certain details remained hidden. Are you brave enough to learn what really happened behind those stone walls? What fate befell those desperate women who sought only to fulfill society's expectations? The truth, as we're about to discover, wasn't rooted in superstition or religious fanaticism. It was something far more calculated and far more dangerous, a perversion of medical science in the name of progress. Harborview, Maine existed in perpetual dampness, fog from the sea mingling with smoke from the whaling factories and lumber mills. The constant drip of water from eaves, the muffled foghorns, and the eerie silence when the mist grew so thick you couldn't see 3 feet ahead. This was a place where secrets could be buried in plain sight. Pinewood Asylum stood 3 miles from town, accessible only by a single winding road that frequently disappeared under winter snows. The building itself was a masterpiece of Gothic revival architecture, all sharp angles and dark stone, with narrow windows like watchful eyes. Local children claimed they could hear women singing at night, though the asylum was too far for any sound to carry. The institution was the pride of Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, a Harvard-educated physician who had studied in Paris and Vienna under the most progressive medical minds of Europe. Tall, immaculately dressed, with a neatly trimmed beard and piercing blue eyes, Dr. Blackwood was both respected and feared. His manner was cold but charismatic, his voice soft but commanding. He had arrived in Harborview in 1846 with impressive letters of recommendation and a radical vision for treating female maladies. "Science must advance boldly where religion has failed these poor souls," he wrote in his manifesto on female reproductive health. "The barren woman suffers not just the absence of children but the absence of purpose. It is our sacred duty to restore both." Assisting Dr. Blackwood was Sister Agnes Thornfield, formerly of the Sisters of Mercy, who had abandoned her vows to pursue nursing. Her severe face and unsmiling efficiency matched her starched white uniform. Some said she had once been married to a sea captain who disappeared. Others, that she had lost a child in birth. Whatever her past, her devotion to Dr. Blackwood's work was absolute. The society of 1840s New England viewed barrenness as a personal failing, almost a moral one. Women unable to conceive were often ostracized, suspected of secret sins, or simply pitied as incomplete beings. Many husbands divorced their wives on grounds of infertility, leaving them destitute. Others sent them to specialists at great expense, desperate for heirs. The pressure was unbearable. "A woman's glory is in her children," wrote Reverend Jonathan Winthrop in his widely circulated pamphlet, The Duties of Christian Wives, 1842. "She who cannot bear fruit is like the cursed fig tree, taking nourishment from the soil while giving nothing in return." Into this culture of shame and desperation stepped Dr. Blackwood, offering hope where there had been none. Thomas Wheeler was just a boy of 12 when he first noticed something unusual at Pinewood. As the groundskeeper's son, he often helped his father maintain the extensive gardens that surrounded the asylum. One autumn morning in 1848, before dawn, he was collecting fallen branches when he saw a carriage arrive, not at the main entrance, but at the service door near the north wing. They were carrying something wrapped in canvas. Thomas would later tell investigators. It was the shape of a person, but they handled it like cargo. Dr. Blackwood was supervising, checking his pocket watch repeatedly. When he saw me, he froze. Then he smiled that smile that never reached his eyes and said, "Medical supplies, young Thomas, fragile equipment that must not be disturbed. You understand the importance of discretion in a place of healing, don't you?" Thomas nodded, but noticed something else. A trail of dark droplets on the gravel path, disappearing into the building. When he mentioned this to his father later, the man went pale and forbade his son from ever speaking of it again. My father changed after that day. Thomas recalled decades later. He'd come home from work and wash his hands over and over. Sometimes I'd find him crying. When I asked what was wrong, he'd say, "There are some sounds a man can't unhear." 2 weeks later, Thomas's father arranged for new employment at a lumber mill 20 miles away. The family moved within the month. But Thomas never forgot what he'd seen, or the strange, sweet medicinal smell that had drifted from that canvas-wrapped shape. A smell that reminded him of the time he'd found a dead fox, but mixed with something chemical and wrong. That image haunted him all his life, the shape of a person being carried like a rolled carpet, and those dark droplets on white gravel disappearing into the asylum that no patient ever left. Mrs. Elizabeth Cook was among the first to notice the changes in her sister Margaret. After 3 years of barrenness in her marriage, Margaret had been admitted to Dr. Blackwood's care in early 1848. 6 months later, the family received a letter announcing a miraculous breakthrough. Margaret could return home for a brief family visit. It wasn't Margaret anymore, Elizabeth confided to her diary. Her body was there, sitting so straight and proper, hands folded just so. She smiled when appropriate, spoke when spoken to, but her eyes, God help me, her eyes were empty, like looking into a doll's face. When I embraced her, she remained stiff as a board. During the visit, Elizabeth noticed other oddities, a long, thin scar partially hidden in Margaret's hairline. The mechanical way she ate, small, identical bites, chewed exactly 12 times. The vacant stare when she thought no one was watching. The way she referred to herself in the third person, "Margaret is feeling well today." Most disturbing was her sister's reaction when Elizabeth's 3-year-old daughter ran to hug her beloved aunt. Margaret recoiled violently, then quickly composed herself. "Children must not touch Margaret," she said, smoothing her dress. "Doctor says Margaret's condition is still delicate." When Elizabeth asked about the treatments, Margaret recited what sounded like a memorized response. "Dr. Blackwood is a brilliant man. His methods are revolutionary. Margaret is making excellent progress." Later that night, Elizabeth found her sister standing naked before the mirror, tracing a line of stitches that ran from just below her ribs down to her pubic bone. When she realized Elizabeth was watching, Margaret turned with that empty smile. "Doctor says Margaret will be a mother soon. A very special mother." The family never saw Margaret again. 2 weeks after her visit, they received a letter explaining she had suffered a setback and required intensive treatment. 3 months later came a notification of her death from complications of treatment, with apologies that her body had been necessarily used for medical study as per institutional policy. Elizabeth tried to investigate, but her husband forbade it, saying they must not question a respected physician. "Some things are best left alone," he insisted. "Think of our reputation." But Elizabeth couldn't forget her sister's words or the look in those vacant eyes. And she wasn't the only one to receive such a visit. Throughout Harborview and neighboring towns, families reported similar experiences. Women returning briefly from Pinewood, changed beyond recognition, speaking mechanically, moving strangely, before being recalled to the asylum, never to emerge again. Among Dr. Blackwood's staff was a young nurse named Charlotte Reed. 22 years old, with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, Charlotte had come to Pinewood with genuine idealism. The daughter of a country doctor, she had grown up assisting her father and developed a passion for medicine, a field largely closed to women. When Dr. Blackwood hired her in late 1848, citing her exceptional intelligence and steadiness of character, Charlotte believed she had found a mentor who saw beyond gender. For the first months, she was restricted to the most basic nursing duties, but she observed everything. The strict hierarchy, the locked rooms in the north wing, the special diet given to certain patients. The women are categorized upon arrival, she wrote in a journal she kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The oldest or least physically robust are designated Category C and housed in the East Wing. They receive standard treatments, cold baths, uterine massage, electrical stimulation. Most are discharged within weeks, their families told that conception is impossible. Category B patients are younger, healthier, but deemed unsuitable for reasons I cannot determine. They undergo more invasive procedures, surgical examinations, extended sedation. Sister Agnes calls them the practice materials. Category A patients disturb me most. All are between 18-30, physically strong, with what Dr. Blackwood calls superior genetic qualities. They are given special diets, vitamins, and subjected to extensive examinations. After initial processing, they're moved to the North Wing. No regular nurse is permitted there except Sister Agnes. Charlotte began volunteering for night shifts, using the quiet hours to explore. She created a detailed map of the facility, noting which areas were restricted and when they were most likely to be unattended. She collected discarded bandages with strange stains, copied fragments of patient records, and even managed to obtain samples of the medications given to Category A patients. The tincture contained something beyond the usual sedatives, she noted after tasting a diluted drop. A peculiar bitterness that numbs the tongue. The patients who receive it become increasingly docile, their eyes dilated even in bright light. Most disturbing were the sounds that sometimes echoed from the North Wing in the deepest hours of night. Not screams of pain, which would have been expected in a medical facility, but something else. A low, rhythmic moaning, almost ritualistic. And beneath it, occasionally, a sound like wet cloth being torn. Charlotte knew she was taking enormous risks. Twice she nearly encountered Dr. Blackwood during her unauthorized explorations. Once, Sister Agnes questioned why she had been seen near the laboratory after hours. I believe they suspect me, she wrote in what would be her penultimate journal entry. Today, Sister Agnes informed me that Dr. Blackwood wishes to discuss my potential for advancement. I am to report to the North Wing tomorrow night at 11. She mentioned with an odd smile that I fit the physical parameters perfectly. Her final entry was hurried, the handwriting jagged. I've found it. God help us all, I've found it. The room beneath the North Wing, the tanks, the specimens, they're not treating infertility, they're harvesting. And I know now what happens to the Category A women who disappear. I've seen the mothers. They're still alive, in a manner of speaking. I must get this journal out somehow. If you're reading this, notify authorities immediately. Look in the sub-basement, count the tanks, match them to the missing women. And whatever you do, don't let them put you to sleep. Once they administer the final preparation, you never truly wake again. That night, Charlotte Reed became patient number 46 in Dr. Blackwood's program. Her intake form, filled out in Sister Agnes's precise handwriting, listed her condition as hysterical paranoia with delusions, and noted she was an ideal physical specimen for advanced treatment protocols. But Charlotte had done something none of the others had managed. Before reporting for her meeting, she had hidden her journal and collected evidence in a waterproof pouch. Now she needed to survive long enough to smuggle it out. The advancement discussion was exactly what she feared. Dr. Blackwood, unusually warm and congratulatory, offered her a special position as his research assistant. "Your intelligence and dedication have not gone unnoticed," he said, pouring 2 glasses of sherry. "Few minds can appreciate the truly revolutionary nature of our work here. I believe you may be one of them." The sherry had a faint, bitter undertaste. Charlotte pretended to sip while watching the doctor's calculating eyes. "You see, Charlotte, conventional medicine treats infertility as a problem to be corrected within the barren woman. But what if the approach is entirely wrong? What if we instead create a new paradigm of reproduction altogether?" As he spoke, Charlotte felt a heaviness in her limbs, a slight blurring of vision. The small amount of drugged sherry that had touched her lips was taking effect. She fought to stay alert, as Dr. Blackwood's voice seemed to come from farther and farther away. "Imagine a future where reproduction is not left to chance, where superior genetic material can be cultivated in ideal vessels, where motherhood becomes a specialized function performed by those best suited physiologically. The implications for human advancement are endless." The room began to spin. Charlotte saw Sister Agnes enter with a wheelchair. As consciousness faded, she heard Dr. Blackwood's final words before darkness claimed her. "You'll be making history, my dear. Not just witnessing it, but becoming an essential part of it. The mother of a new kind of future." And Charlotte knew then what no previous patient had realized before it was too late. She wouldn't be treated. She would be transformed. And whatever emerged afterward would no longer be Charlotte Reed, regardless of the body it inhabited. As the darkness closed in, her hand closed around the small, sharp surgical blade she had stolen and hidden in her sleeve. She might not escape, but she would not become one of those empty-eyed vessels. One way or another, she would stop what was happening at Pinewood, or die trying. Charlotte woke to the sensation of cold metal against her back. The room was bright, too bright, with electric lights that seemed impossibly white for 1848. She tried to move, but found her wrists and ankles secured. A breathing mask covered her face, delivering air tinged with something sweet and chemical. Through the haze, she made out blurry shapes moving around her. "Doctor." Blackwood's voice floated somewhere above. "Subject 46 shows remarkable resilience to the sedative. Increased dosage by 15%. Charlotte forced her eyes to focus, taking in details despite the drug clouding her mind. The room was unlike any other in Pinewood. Gleaming surfaces, strange equipment, glass containers with floating shapes she couldn't quite identify. Most disturbing was a row of large glass tanks against the far wall, each containing cloudy fluid and connected to complex machinery. "Vessel preparation will commence once baseline consciousness is suppressed," Dr. Blackwood continued, speaking to someone out of Charlotte's field of vision. "Initial incision along the established pattern. We'll extract monitoring samples at standard intervals." Charlotte felt panic rising, clearing some of the fog. She tested her restraints again, finding the right wrist strap slightly looser than the others. The small surgical blade remained hidden in her sleeve, pressing against her forearm. If she could just maneuver her hand to reach it. A figure moved into view. Sister Agnes, dressed not in her nursing uniform, but in a strange rubber apron over a surgical gown. She was arranging instruments on a tray beside the table, sharp things, cutting things. "Doctor," Sister Agnes said, her voice clinically detached. "Shall we proceed with the standard cerebral preparation first, or move directly to abdominal modification?" "The cerebral work is essential before the main procedure," Dr. Blackwood replied. "We've had failures when attempting to reverse the sequence. The vessel must be properly receptive." Charlotte realized with horror what they were discussing. The cerebral preparation explained the scars along hairlines, the vacant eyes, the changed personalities. They were altering women's brains before whatever other procedures followed. With desperate focus, Charlotte began working her right hand toward the blade while trying to appear unconscious. The drug made her movements sluggish, but the fear provided clarity. She heard footsteps approaching, then Dr. Blackwood's voice directly above her. Begin recording. Subject 46, preliminary examination. Physical parameters ideal. Unusually strong mental resistance to preparation compounds, suggesting exceptional neural architecture. This subject may be suitable for the advanced protocol. Charlotte felt gloved fingers probe along her scalp, marking positions. Initial incision will follow the standard pattern, but with modified access to the prefrontal regions. Sister Agnes, prepare the trepanning equipment. Time was running out. Charlotte managed to twist her wrist just enough to feel the blade's edge against her fingers. As Sister Agnes moved away to retrieve equipment, Charlotte grasped the blade and began sawing at the leather restraint, praying the sound wouldn't be noticed over the mechanical hum filling the room. Dr. Blackwood continued his clinical monologue. Once cerebral compliance is established, we'll proceed with the abdominal modifications to create the optimal environment. Subject 46 will join the Phase 3 program, where... He stopped abruptly. Charlotte froze, thinking she'd been discovered, but his attention was directed elsewhere. "What is it?" he asked sharply. Sister Agnes's voice came from across the room. "A disturbance upstairs, Doctor. One of the Category B subjects appears to be having a reaction to the preparation compound." Dr. Blackwood cursed under his breath. "Maintain monitoring here. I'll address the situation and return promptly." Subject 46 is too valuable to risk compromise. Charlotte heard his footsteps recede, followed by a door opening and closing. This might be her only chance. She renewed her efforts on the restraint, feeling it begin to give way as the blade sawed through the leather. Sister Agnes was still in the room, but had moved to adjust equipment near the tanks. Charlotte worked frantically, finally cutting through the wrist restraint. With her right hand free, she quickly loosened the breathing mask and reached for the restraint on her left wrist. A shadow fell across her face. Charlotte looked up to find Sister Agnes standing over her, eyes cold with recognition. "I suspected you were not fully sedated," she said, reaching for Charlotte's free hand. "A mistake we will rectify immediately." In a desperate move, Charlotte slashed with the surgical blade. Sister Agnes jerked back, the blade catching her across the forearm. She hissed in pain, but showed no other reaction as she lunged to restrain Charlotte. What followed was a silent, desperate struggle. Charlotte managed to free her left hand and was working on an ankle restraint when Sister Agnes recovered and grabbed her by the throat. Despite her slim build, the older woman possessed surprising strength. "You cannot stop this work," Sister Agnes whispered, her face inches from Charlotte's. "You cannot even comprehend its importance." Charlotte's vision began to darken as the woman's grip tightened. With her last strength, she drove the blade upward. Sister Agnes made a small, surprised sound, then slumped forward. Charlotte pushed the woman's body aside and quickly freed her remaining ankle. Every movement was a battle against the lingering effects of the drug. She stumbled from the table, nearly falling as her legs threatened to give way. The room spun around her as she forced herself to focus. She needed evidence. Proof of what was happening here. Her gaze fell on a leather-bound journal on Dr. Blackwood's desk. She stuffed it into her dress alongside her own hidden journal. Then she noticed something else. A small metal case containing several glass vials of amber liquid labeled Cerebral Preparation Compound X-17. She took one vial, then turned her attention to the row of tanks along the wall. Moving closer, she peered through the cloudy fluid in the nearest one. What she saw would haunt her for the rest of her life. A woman, or what had once been a woman, floated in the fluid. Tubes and wires connected to her body at multiple points. Her abdomen was distended, unnaturally stretched. But most horrifying was her face, eyes open but unseeing, mouth slightly parted as if frozen in mid-breath. A large portion of her skull had been removed and replaced with some sort of metal apparatus that connected to machinery above the tank. Charlotte stumbled back, bile rising in her throat. She counted the tanks, 11 in total, each containing a similar figure. 11 women suspended between life and death, their bodies transformed into vessels for whatever twisted experiment Dr. Blackwood was conducting. She had to get out, had to take the evidence to authorities. But first, she couldn't leave these women like this. It would be mercy to end their suffering. With trembling hands, Charlotte located the central control panel for the life support systems. It took precious moments to decipher the complex array of switches and dials, but she finally found what appeared to be the main power control. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the floating figures. "May God receive you in peace." She threw the switch. Lights flickered throughout the equipment. The bubbling in the tanks slowed, then stopped. The constant mechanical hum died away to silence. Charlotte turned to flee, pausing only to grab a lantern from near the door. She had no idea how long Dr. Blackwood would be occupied upstairs, but every second counted. The door led to a narrow corridor she didn't recognize. She must be in the sub-basement level she'd heard rumors about but never accessed. The passageway stretched ahead, dimly lit by sparse electric lights. Technology that wouldn't become common for decades. Dr. Blackwood's operation was not just morally advanced, but technologically so as well. Charlotte moved as quickly as her drugged body allowed, following the corridor until it branched. She chose the path that seemed to lead upward, encountering a heavy metal door that mercifully opened to reveal a stone staircase. As she climbed, she heard a distant alarm begin to sound. They had discovered her escape. The staircase emerged in a storage room off the asylum's kitchen, empty at this late hour. Charlotte oriented herself quickly. The nearest exit would be the service door near the gardens, but it might be guarded. She decided to risk the laundry chute that led to the outbuilding behind the asylum. Making her way through darkened corridors, Charlotte ducked into shadows whenever she heard approaching footsteps. The alarm had roused the night staff, and she glimpsed orderlies rushing toward the north wing. She took advantage of the confusion to slip into the linen room where the laundry chute was located. The chute was narrow, designed for bundles of sheets, not people. But Charlotte was slight enough to fit. She lowered herself in, using her arms to slow her descent as she slid down into darkness. The rough wooden sides scraped her skin, but she bit back any sound. She landed hard in a pile of dirty linens, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. The laundry building was dark and cold, used only during daylight hours. Charlotte allowed herself just a moment to recover before moving to the door. Outside, the night was moonless, with heavy fog obscuring all but the nearest objects. A blessing and a curse. The fog would hide her, but it would also make navigation difficult. She needed to get to town, to find someone with authority who would believe her story. Charlotte oriented herself using the dim lights of Pinewood behind her, then began moving in the direction of Harborview. The rocky path was treacherous in the darkness, her drug-weakened legs threatening to betray her with each step. Behind her, she heard voices calling, lanterns piercing the fog as the search began. She left the path, moving into the dense woods that surrounded the asylum grounds. The forest was old and thick, branches clawing at her clothes, roots threatening to trip her. But she pressed on, one thought keeping her moving: those women in the tanks, their bodies violated and transformed in the name of progress. After what seemed like hours, Charlotte glimpsed lights ahead, the outskirts of Harborview. She emerged from the woods near the harbor itself, where fishing boats rocked gently in the pre-dawn darkness. A few early-rising fishermen were preparing their vessels for the day's work. Charlotte approached the nearest boat, where an older man was checking nets. "Please," she gasped, her voice hoarse. "I need help." The fisherman turned, eyes widening at her appearance. dress torn and dirty, face scratched, wild-eyed with fear. "Good Lord, miss, what's happened to you?" "Pinewood," she managed, clutching the evidence to her chest. "Dr. Blackwood. He's doing terrible things, experimenting on women. I have proof. I need to speak to the sheriff." The man's expression changed, growing guarded. "Pinewood, you say? Dr. Blackwood's place?" He exchanged a glance with another fisherman who had approached. "Miss, you'd best come with us. We'll get you somewhere safe." Something in his tone made Charlotte hesitate. She took a step back, suddenly wary. "You don't believe me. Now, miss, you're clearly unwell. Dr. Blackwood is a respected physician. He helps women with female troubles." The second fisherman moved to block her path back to the shore. "My sister-in-law was treated there. Came back right as rain." "No one comes back," Charlotte insisted. "They're changed or they disappear. He's cutting open their skulls, altering their minds, using their bodies for breeding experiments." The men exchanged another look, this one unmistakably concerned. "She's hysterical," the first man said quietly. "Should we fetch the doctor?" Charlotte realized with growing horror that no one would believe her, a disheveled woman making wild accusations against a respected physician. In this era, such behavior would be instantly dismissed as female hysteria, probably leading to her own commitment to an asylum. She clutched her evidence tighter. She needed someone who would listen, someone with authority who might be willing to investigate, despite Dr. Blackwood's reputation. "Sheriff Collins," she said suddenly. "Take me to Sheriff Collins. He'll know what to do." The older fisherman hesitated, then nodded slowly. "All right, miss. Old Jeremiah Collins lives just up on Harbor Street. We can take you there." Charlotte felt a surge of hope. Sheriff Collins was known as a fair-minded man who followed evidence rather than rumor. If she could just show him Dr. Blackwood's journal, the compound, explain what she'd seen. They made their way through the silent streets of early-morning Harborview, fog shrouding the buildings in ghostly gray. Charlotte remained alert, watching for pursuit from the asylum, but saw no sign they had tracked her to town. The sheriff's house was a modest two-story structure with a small sign designating it as the town's law enforcement office. A lamp already burned in the front window despite the early hour. The older fisherman knocked firmly on the door. After a moment it swung open to reveal Sheriff Jeremiah Collins, a tall man with a weathered face and graying beard, already dressed despite the hour. "Jacob, what brings you here before sunrise?" His gaze shifted to Charlotte, eyes narrowing with concern. "And who might this be?" "Says she's from Pinewood, Sheriff, making some mighty disturbing claims about Dr. Blackwood. Thought you ought to hear her out." The sheriff studied Charlotte for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come in, miss. You look like you could use a warm fire and perhaps some coffee." Once inside, Charlotte sank gratefully into a chair by the hearth, the warmth beginning to penetrate the deep chill that had settled in her bones. The fishermen excused themselves, returning to their boats with promises to check in later. Sheriff Collins poured coffee from a pot keeping warm on the stove, handing a mug to Charlotte with surprising gentleness. "Now then, miss, why don't you tell me your name and what's brought you here in such a state?" "My name is Charlotte Reed. I was a nurse at Pinewood Asylum." Her hands trembled as she reached into her dress, withdrawing the evidence she'd stolen. "Sheriff Collins, Dr. Blackwood is conducting horrific experiments on women who come to him seeking treatment for infertility. I've seen it with my own eyes." She placed Dr. Blackwood's journal on the table between them, alongside the vial of amber liquid. "This is his research journal. It details everything, the procedures, the modifications, the breeding program he's implementing." The sheriff's expression remained neutral as he picked up the journal, flipping through pages filled with diagrams, notes, and observations. His eyes widened slightly at certain passages. "These women aren't being treated," Charlotte continued urgently. "They're being transformed into vessels, their minds altered to remove resistance, their bodies modified to serve as..." as living incubators for something he calls the future of controlled reproduction. I was nearly subjected to the procedure myself tonight, but I managed to escape. Sheriff Collins set down the journal, his face grave. These are serious accusations, Miss Reed. Dr. Blackwood has powerful friends, not just in Harborview but in Boston and beyond. His work on female health issues has been praised by medical societies throughout New England. It's all a facade, Charlotte insisted. The women who enter Pinewood never truly leave. Some are sent home when deemed unsuitable for his experiments. But those he selects, young, healthy women with what he calls superior genetic qualities, they disappear into the North Wing and are never seen again. Except... She hesitated, then continued. Except sometimes, families receive visits from women who look like their loved ones but are changed, empty, mechanical. These aren't treatments gone wrong, Sheriff. They're intentional transformations. The sheriff was silent for a long moment, studying her face. Then he rose and moved to a cabinet, withdrawing a bottle of whiskey and adding a splash to his coffee. Miss Reed, he said finally, I've lived in Harborview all my life. Served as sheriff for 23 years. In that time, I've learned to trust my instincts about when someone is telling the truth. He paused, taking a sip of his fortified coffee. And right now, those instincts are telling me you believe every word you're saying. Charlotte felt tears of relief threatening to spill. Someone believed her. But, the sheriff continued, raising a hand, belief isn't enough. We need concrete evidence that will stand up to the scrutiny of a judge and the influence of Dr. Blackwood's connections. This journal is damning, but a clever lawyer would claim it was misinterpreted or fabricated. He picked up the vial, examining the amber liquid. And this substance, without proper analysis, it's just an unidentified chemical. There's more, Charlotte said urgently. In the sub-basement of the North Wing, 11 women, or what remains of them, suspended in tanks. Their bodies altered, their minds partially removed and replaced with machinery. If you go now, before he has time to hide everything. A knock at the door interrupted her. Sheriff Collins frowned, setting down his mug and moving to answer it. Charlotte felt a sudden chill of premonition. She rose from her chair, gathering the evidence back into her dress. The sheriff opened the door to reveal a well-dressed man Charlotte didn't recognize, accompanied by 2 town constables. Behind them stood Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, immaculate as always despite the early hour, his face a mask of professional concern. Sheriff Collins, the well-dressed man said formally. I'm Dr. Harrison from the State Medical Board. We've come regarding an escaped patient from Pinewood Asylum. A young woman suffering from dangerous delusions who attacked a staff member and may pose a risk to herself and others. Sheriff Collins looked from Dr. Harrison to Charlotte, his expression carefully neutral. I see. And I assume this is the patient in question? Indeed. Dr. Blackwood stepped forward, his voice gentle with practiced concern. Charlotte Reed. One of our most promising nurses until she began exhibiting troubling symptoms of paranoia 2 weeks ago. We've been monitoring her condition, hoping it might resolve without intervention, but tonight, she suffered a complete break from reality. He gestured to a bandage visible beneath his sleeve. She attacked Sister Agnes with a surgical instrument, then sabotaged vital medical equipment, endangering patients under our care. We've come to return her to Pinewood, where she can receive proper treatment. Charlotte backed away from the door. He's lying, Sheriff. I only became a threat when I discovered what they're doing. Ask him about the women in the tanks. Ask him about the cerebral modifications and the breeding program. Dr. Harrison exchanged a knowing look with Dr. Blackwood. You see, Sheriff? Classic paranoid delusions with elements of persecution and conspiracy. Quite common in cases of female hysteria, especially in women of intellectual bent who overtax their cerebral capacity. Sheriff Collins remained in the doorway, effectively blocking the men from entering. Dr. Blackwood, these are serious accusations Miss Reed is making. As an officer of the law, I'm obligated to investigate any claims of potential wrongdoing, regardless of who makes them or who they're made against. Dr. Blackwood's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. Of course, Sheriff, I would expect nothing less. However, Miss Reed is currently under the influence of powerful sedatives that were administered before her escape. Her perceptions cannot be trusted. I suggest we return her to medical care immediately, after which you would be most welcome to visit Pinewood and inspect our facilities to your satisfaction. The sheriff considered this, then turned slightly toward Charlotte. Miss Reed, did they administer medications to you tonight? Charlotte nodded reluctantly. Yes, but not enough to completely sedate me. That's how I was able to escape. Sheriff, please, if you let them take me back, they'll make me like the others. They'll cut into my brain and transform me into one of their empty vessels. You see how the delusion persists, Dr. Harrison interjected. This is precisely why immediate medical intervention is crucial. Sheriff Collins stood his ground. Gentlemen, I understand your concern, but I cannot in good conscience release Miss Reed into your custody without further investigation. She has provided what appears to be substantive evidence supporting her claims. For the first time, Dr. Blackwood's composure slipped. Evidence? What evidence? Her testimony, for one, the sheriff replied evenly, and certain documents and materials she brought with her. Dr. Blackwood's gaze darted to Charlotte, calculating. Sheriff Collins, I fear you're being manipulated by a very disturbed young woman. Any evidence she presents is undoubtedly fabricated or stolen medical documents that she lacks the training to properly interpret. As for materials, well, Pinewood is a medical facility. Removing drugs or medical compounds poses serious risks. One of the constables shifted uncomfortably. Sheriff, Dr. Blackwood is highly respected. My own wife was treated at Pinewood for nervous exhaustion last year. Perhaps we should... The law applies equally to all, Constable Peters. Sheriff Collins cut in firmly. Respected or not. Now, gentlemen, I propose a compromise. Miss Reed will remain in my custody while I dispatch deputies to Pinewood for a preliminary inspection. If they find nothing to substantiate her claims, we can revisit the matter of her care. Dr. Blackwood's face hardened into a mask of professional disapproval. Sheriff, I must protest. Delaying proper medical care could exacerbate Miss Reed's condition. Furthermore, an unannounced inspection would disrupt the careful routine our patients require for recovery. Then consider this announcement enough, the sheriff replied. My deputies will arrive within the hour. I suggest you return to prepare for their visit. Dr. Harrison stepped forward. Sheriff Collins, I must inform you that interfering with the medical custody of a diagnosed patient could have serious legal consequences. The State Medical Board has authority in these matters that supersedes local law enforcement. The standoff continued for several tense moments before Sheriff Collins finally nodded. Very well. I recognize the Medical Board's authority in matters of patient care. However, he held up a hand as Dr. Blackwood began to look triumphant. I retain authority to investigate potential criminal activity. Miss Reed will indeed be returned to Pinewood, but under my personal escort. I will remain on the premises during her initial evaluation and treatment, and my deputies will conduct their inspections simultaneously. It wasn't ideal, but Charlotte felt a surge of hope. At least she wouldn't be alone with them. If the sheriff witnessed what happened in the treatment rooms, he would have to act. Dr. Blackwood and Dr. Harrison exchanged glances before the latter nodded curtly. That arrangement is acceptable, provided you do not interfere with medical procedures. Then it's settled, Sheriff Collins said. Allow me a moment to secure my effects, and we'll proceed to Pinewood together. As the men withdrew to the porch, the sheriff turned to Charlotte. I don't have much time, he said in a low voice. Is there anything else you can tell me, something specific my deputies should look for? Charlotte spoke rapidly. The north wing is where it happens. The entrance to the sub-basement is hidden behind a storage cabinet in the surgical preparation room. The tanks are there, 11 women suspended in fluid, connected to machines, and there's a laboratory where he keeps records of all the procedures. Sheriff, if they take me back there, I won't let them harm you, he promised, checking his revolver before returning it to its holster. Stay close to me at all times. But as they stepped onto the porch, Charlotte felt a sharp prick in her arm. She turned to see Dr. Harrison withdrawing a syringe, his expression coldly triumphant. A mild sedative, Sheriff, he explained as Charlotte's vision began to blur. Standard procedure for transporting agitated patients. Perfectly safe, I assure you. Sheriff Collins protested, but his voice seemed to come from very far away as darkness closed in around Charlotte. When Charlotte regained consciousness, she found herself in a familiar setting, the treatment room in Pinewood's north wing. She was once again restrained, but this time vertical, secured to some kind of upright framework. Her head was immobilized in a metal brace, and she could feel electrodes attached to her temples. Through the haze of drugs, she made out several figures in the room. Dr. Blackwood and Sister Agnes stood by a control panel. Dr. Harrison was explaining something to Sheriff Collins, whose face showed growing concern. Merely a demonstration of the advanced therapeutic techniques we employ, Dr. Harrison was saying. Electrical modulation of the cerebral pathways has shown remarkable efficacy in treating delusional states. This seems excessive, the sheriff replied, eyeing the apparatus with suspicion. I was under the impression Miss Reed would receive a standard medical examination. This is the examination, Sheriff, Dr. Blackwood interjected smoothly. We must assess the extent of her psychosis before determining appropriate treatment. The apparatus looks intimidating, I grant you, but it causes no permanent harm. Charlotte tried to speak, but found her jaw immobilized by the head brace. She could only make muffled sounds of protest. She's regaining consciousness, Sister Agnes noted, adjusting a dial on the control panel. Shall we proceed with the demonstration, Doctor? Dr. Blackwood nodded. A brief application only. Enough to illustrate the calming effect. He turned to the sheriff. You'll observe how agitation subsides as we modulate the overactive regions of the brain. Sheriff Collins stepped closer to Charlotte, studying her eyes. Whatever he saw there made his expression harden. I don't like this, Dr. Blackwood. Miss Reed appears terrified, not agitated. I think we should... A commotion from the hallway interrupted him. Raised voices, running footsteps. The door burst open to reveal one of the sheriff's deputies, his face pale with shock. Sheriff, you need to see this. In the sub-basement, just like she said. The tanks, the women in them. Dr. Blackwood's composure finally shattered. This is outrageous. You have no authority to access restricted areas of a medical facility. He turned to Dr. Harrison. Restrain the sheriff. We must proceed with the procedure immediately. What followed was chaos. Dr. Harrison lunged for Sheriff Collins, who sidestepped and drew his revolver. Sister Agnes moved to the control panel, fingers hovering over the activation switch. The deputy advanced, his own weapon drawn. Step away from Miss Reed, Sheriff Collins ordered, his voice steady despite the tension. And move away from that panel, sister. This facility is now under investigation for criminal activity. Dr. Blackwood's face transformed, academic detachment giving way to cold fury. You understand nothing of what we're accomplishing here. Generations from now, when reproduction is fully controlled and optimized, when humanity has evolved beyond the messy biological lottery of natural conception, history will remember us as pioneers. History will remember you as a monster, the sheriff replied. Now stand down and order your staff to release Miss Reed. For a moment, it seemed Dr. Blackwood might comply. Then, with surprising speed for a man of his age, he grabbed a scalpel from a nearby tray and lunged toward Charlotte. If I cannot continue my work, then neither will she expose it. The gunshot echoed deafeningly in the tiled room. Dr. Blackwood staggered, the scalpel clattering to the floor as he clutched his shoulder. Sister Agnes screamed, rushing to his side as he collapsed. In the ensuing confusion, more deputies arrived. Sheriff Collins personally released Charlotte from the restraints, supporting her as her drug-weakened legs threatened to give way. "It's over," he told her quietly. "We found everything. The laboratory, the records, those poor women in the tanks. It's all the evidence we need." But Charlotte knew it wasn't truly over. Not for the families of the victims, not for the women who had died in those tanks, and not for her. Some horrors once witnessed never leave you. When authorities arrived at Pinewood Asylum in force the following day, they found the facility almost entirely abandoned. Dr. Blackwood, despite his injury, had vanished during the night, along with Dr. Harrison and most of the senior staff. Only a few orderlies and junior nurses remained, claiming ignorance of any wrongdoing. The evidence, however, was undeniable. 11 women, all matching records of patients who had supposedly been discharged or had died of complications, were found in the sub-basement tanks. None survived removal from the life support systems, their bodies and brains too extensively modified to function independently. Records recovered from Dr. Blackwood's laboratory detailed 5 years of increasingly invasive experiments, beginning with attempts to correct infertility through surgical means, then progressing to more radical approaches. The final phase, only recently implemented, involved creating what he called optimized reproductive vessels. Women whose minds had been surgically altered to remove resistance or distress, and whose bodies had been modified to serve as living incubators. Most disturbing were references to implantation successes, specimens being grown within these vessels that were not conventional human embryos, but something Dr. Blackwood had engineered through methods that remained unclear from the available documentation. The authorities moved quickly to suppress the full details, concerned about public panic and moral outrage. Officially, Pinewood was closed due to improper medical practices and patient neglect. Families of the identified victims were privately informed of their loved ones' fates, sworn to secrecy, and compensated from state funds. Dr. Blackwood and his core associates were never found, despite an international manhunt. Rumors persisted for decades, sightings in Vienna, reports of similar medical facilities in remote regions of Switzerland or Russia, whispers of continued experimentation funded by wealthy patrons obsessed with controlling human reproduction. As for Charlotte Reed, she testified before a closed tribunal, providing the key evidence that exposed the Pinewood atrocities. Afterward, suffering from what would now be recognized as severe trauma, she retreated from public life entirely. She spent her remaining years in a small coastal cottage miles from Harborview, refusing all visitors except Sheriff Collins, who checked on her periodically until his death in 1863. She never practiced nursing again, nor spoke publicly about what she had witnessed. Charlotte's personal journal, discovered after her death in 1879, provided the only first-hand account of the Pinewood horror from someone who had both witnessed and escaped it. Even then, authorities suppressed its publication for nearly a century, citing public sensibilities and national security concerns. The journal's final entry, dated May 3, 1849, reads, "I still hear them at night. Those women floating in their glass prisons, neither living nor dead. I wonder if they dreamed. I wonder if some part of them was still aware, trapped inside bodies and minds that no longer belonged to them." That is the true horror of what Blackwood did. Not just the pain or death, but the transformation, the theft of self while leaving the body behind as an empty vessel for his ambitions. When science abandons conscience, progress becomes not just meaningless but monstrous. I pray that his work died with those women, but I fear it continues somewhere, in shadows beyond our sight. The world is not ready to confront such darkness, nor the terrible question it raises. How far will we go in the name of advancement when we decide certain lives are merely tools for achieving it? Echoes into the present. In 1972, during renovation of a historic building in Vienna that had once housed a private medical research facility, workers discovered a sealed room in the sub-basement. Inside were preserved documents dating from 1850 to 1887, all bearing the signature of Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood. The materials indicated that Blackwood had continued his work for decades after fleeing Pinewood, supported by wealthy European patrons fascinated by his vision of controlled human evolution. The documents suggested progressive refinement of his methods, with disturbing references to generation vessels and successful non-traditional gestations. Most alarming was correspondence dated 1885, in which Blackwood, by then elderly but still active, discussed transferring his research to associates who would continue the work beyond the constraints of conventional medical ethics or government oversight. The discovery prompted a classified investigation by international authorities, but the trail had long since gone cold. The documents were sealed in government archives, their contents deemed too disturbing for public release. Occasionally, medical historians or investigative journalists have attempted to piece together the full Pinewood story, but critical records remain classified, key witnesses are long dead, and the scientific details of Blackwood's work are too fragmentary to reconstruct with certainty. What remains clear is that in a remote Maine asylum in 1847, a boundary was crossed, a line between medical treatment and human experimentation that forever altered how we must view the relationship between science, ethics, and progress. As Charlotte Reed wrote in her final journal entry, "When the pursuit of knowledge abandons compassion, when human beings become mere vessels for ambition, science ceases to serve humanity and instead becomes its greatest threat." The darkest shadows are not cast by ignorance, but by brilliance without conscience, light so focused and intense that it burns whatever it touches into ash. The women of Pinewood Asylum, those who entered seeking only to fulfill society's expectations and found themselves transformed into experimental subjects, left no monuments, no lasting records beyond the sparse medical notations of their tormentor. Their names are forgotten, their suffering obscured by time and deliberate obfuscation, but the questions their fate raises echo into our present. Who controls the human body? Where do we draw the line between treatment and transformation? What price is too high for progress? And perhaps most importantly, who decides when another human being becomes a means rather than an end? In the dense fog of coastal Maine, where Pinewood Asylum once stood, nothing remains but overgrown stone foundations. Local residents avoid the area, claiming it feels wrong somehow, colder than the surrounding forest, unnaturally silent, as if nature itself remembers what happened there and keeps its distance. Some say that on certain nights when the fog rolls in thick from the sea, you can hear women's voices singing faintly among the ruins. A gentle lullaby for children who were never born, sung by mothers who were never allowed to be.